Okay, we're going to be talking today about Plato's Apology, although it's sometimes, depending on the translation that you have, it's called the Trial of Socrates.
Yeah, is
Right.
that right? I always called it the Apology.
Mhm.
But nonetheless, this is an excellent chapter that talks about the trial of Socrates. Socrates, as we discussed in the last chapter, that was Euthyphro, is indicted by a gentleman named Meletus. And there are certain charges that have been laid against Socrates. One is that he doesn't believe in the gods, that he corrupts the minds of young men,
Yeah, corrupting the youth of Athens.
corrupting the youth. And that's why he's been brought to trial. In Euthyphro, he meets with a man of God and asks him that, this charge of impiety that they've laid against me, how do I defend against that? What does it mean to be impious? And then he goes on to show, to prove to Euthyphro in a way that even Euthyphro doesn't necessarily know the difference between pious and justice, or what piety is, in fact. And then the next chapter that right after Euthyphro is the Apology. Is there anything that I missed there?
No, that's a good summary. So basically, he runs into Euthyphro on the way to court, and then now he's within his own trial. I think it's also important to note that the apology is not meant so much in common parlance that it's not like he's asking for forgiveness. It's not an apology or a gesture toward atonement per se. Apology is just, I think it's a translational issue, because the apology is basically how one would defend themselves to an accusation in the Athenian court. So that's why it's called apology.
Okay.
So basically the dialogue starts off with Socrates essentially outlining the charges against him and how he plans to refute the charges, which you just mentioned, which is that he is essentially corrupting the minds of the youth of Athens, and that he is not speaking in a way that's compliant with the gods, meaning he's speaking in ways that indicate to the populace, again, this is the claim, that he does not believe in the gods. And so because of this, his impiety, okay, so echoing back to Euthyphro, he is being accused of essentially going against social norms. And the idea here is that there's a suspicion of Socrates having a corrosive effect, not just on the youth of Athens, but to the city of Athens as a whole, from a political standpoint.
The gods of the city is what Meletus says. He doesn't believe in the gods of the city and invents new gods.
Right.
So Socrates used to go around telling people that he has this daimon that talks to him and tells him what is the right and the wrong thing to do. And that is the charge, that he actually is inventing a new god and doesn't believe in the gods of the city. The apology is a dialogue. There are times when other people chime in, but for the most part, Socrates is talking to this large audience of men who are there to come up with a verdict. They're a bunch of it's a jury, and in the Athenian democracy, it used to be a large jury from many different tribes, and people would all come in and send representatives to
And
this.
by large, we mean like hundreds of people.
Oh yeah, there are hundreds of people in there.
Right.
And so the first part of this conversation is him talking about the charge that has been laid to him. It is his defense. And so today we will try to cover as much as we can about Socrates' defense. And then there's a part of the chapter which talks about he's been given a verdict. And then the final part is, how he, and he's given a verdict, and then the final part is he's given actually a punishment. And so how he deals with the three. So we'll try and cover as much as we can. The largest part is his defense. So without further ado, let's just start with the apology. So do you wanna kick this off?
So so Socrates starts off by saying that first, he starts with a very interesting disclaimer, which is that he is not a professional orator, which is ironic because when you read what other philosophers write about Socrates, the common thread is that he is the greatest teacher. He is the greatest as it pertains to argument development, rational thinking. But Socrates, and with some degree of irony, starts off by saying, look, I'm not a professional orator, so forgive my inability to communicate effectively to the crowd. Please don't hold that against me, is how he starts off by saying. But then, in classic fashion, he says, however, I am here to express the truth to the extent that I know it, and to the extent that I know the limitations of what I know. And so he says, if by oration you mean my ability to express the truth, well, then I am a great orator, because all I'm going to give you, he's talking now to the people that are judging him and also to the crowd that's going to be giving him the verdict. He's going to say, he's saying that, well, if the truth is what you want to hear, that is what I'm going to give to you very effectively.
That's correct.
So that's how he starts off.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, because at the time in Athens, because it was a democracy, one had to defend themselves in court a lot. You would get sued for all sorts of things.
Sure, yeah.
And the majority of the people were not educated enough to be able to stand in court, know the laws, understand the laws, and then come up with a cogent defense. And so they would hire people to do that. And as a matter of fact, you couldn't hire somebody to go represent you in court. You had to represent yourself. So you had to hire somebody to train you how to represent you in court. And the folks who would do that were called sophists. So Plato, Socrates especially, was against the sophists. Sophists were people who would train people in the art of dialogue, of negotiation.
Well, what we would term now as sophistry, which is sort of like very argument for the sake of argument.
Right.
Sort of it's not substantive argument. This
Correct.
is more of a how to, in an almost cynical fashion, elaborate and smoke and mirrors types of wordplay.
That's correct.
Casuistry is the other term for it. Yeah.
Rhetoric.
Rhetoric. That's
it's
the
rhetoric,
word, yeah.
and we talk about rhetoric all the time now.
Yeah.
And rhetoric has its place, but Socrates was definitely against rhetoric. And one of the things about rhetoric is that they make the lesser sound like the greater. They make the bad sound like the good. That is what rhetoric is, and so he was completely against that, and that's why he uses that term very early on. He says, "I would not be speaking to you in this polished, artificial language. I would be speaking to you and telling you only the truth." And so just consider and apply your mind to this alone, whether I say what is just or not. For that's the virtue or excellence of a juror, just as the orator's lies in telling the truth. So I'm not going to be a sophist. I'm not going to make the lesser argument the greater. I'm just going to tell you the truth. And it is your job as a juror to be able to know if I am being a just man or not based on what I tell you. And that skill is as important as an orator's is in telling the truth. So I think it's very important. It's very telling for...
Yeah, and I think it's also worth noting that one of the charges against Socrates, or at least one of the things that's used to undergird the charges against Socrates, is that people claim that Socrates does precisely what the sophists do, which is to sort of make the stronger argument weaker, and essentially to sort of tear down truth and obfuscate and obscure the truth through rhetorical maneuvers and acrobatics.
That's correct.
And Socrates is very quick to point out, all I'm simply doing is demonstrating to people what they do and do not know.
Right. So that brings us to this, how he starts with his argument. So first he kind of gives us a little bit of introduction about him, saying how he's going to talk. And then he goes into why he is here in this in the first place. Why is he being accused? He says that people are angry at him because he believes that he is a wise man. And he's rubbing that in everybody's faces. Now, that's a very different charge from what actually the charge is. The charge is impiety and leading young people astray. But he doesn't start with that. He starts with, the reason why I'm here in the first place is because you think that I believe I'm a wise man and I'm going about rubbing it in your faces. And that as a wise man, I know about these things that are great and small, and that I make the weaker argument the stronger. Now, what are these great and small things. The great and small things are things that are much beyond the human scale. That's your dog. Much beyond the human scale, like gazing into the stars, thinking about things that are of the metaphysical sense, or small, that is, way below the human nature, or things like what lies under the earth and things like that. So that is actually the wisdom that people talk about. Wise about the things that are outer worldly. Socrates says, I am not wise about those things at all. I spend no time contemplating any of those things. My biggest concern is human to human interaction and ethics. And of all of that, my biggest concern was that when I was told by someone that I was the wisest man there was, I couldn't believe it. Because I don't know anything about the great things in the universe or the small things in the universe. I don't know any about that, of that stuff. Maybe what they were talking about was the fact that I knew about human to human interactions, that practical wisdom I possessed, because Socrates was almost 70. By the time this trial was going on, he had seen a lot of life. He had famously fought in the Peloponnesian Wars as a hoplite. He said, I have all of this practical wisdom. Maybe that's what they're talking about. But even that doesn't make any sense. How could it be that I'm the wisest person? And so he starts off with that. Because he says that this charge against me has not been just laid by Meletus. This is a charge that generations of people before him, because Meletus is a very young man, generations of people before him have been laying this charge about me. This is a storyline that people have come up with, and they've accused Socrates of doing for many, many, many years. And all of those people have been accusing Socrates. And now he cannot defend himself against those accusations because those people are dead and gone. And what they've created is a persona of Socrates. And that persona of Socrates, Socrates says, I cannot defend. It is like it's like a celebrity has a certain persona that you and me as common people think about that person, and they can never extricate themselves from that persona. Yeah. And that's what Socrates is talking about. It's so close to the social media culture that we have right now.
He's actually sort of victimized by his own celebrity in a way.
Right.
Because that's an important thing to add to the context here. So when Socrates is undergoing trial, he is a little bit of a celebrity. In fact, one of the pieces of evidence that's invoked during his trial is his representation in a play by Aristophanes called Clouds, where Socrates was portrayed as sort of this almost otherworldly, superhumanly wise being. And so that painted a lot of what the people in the audience knew about him.
That's right.
So he did have kind of this celebrity status because Socrates lived to see himself portrayed in a play. So somebody in ancient Greece, for them, that's got to be, the equivalent of being as sort of like a reality TV.
That's right. Like reality TV, like Kim Kardashian.
But the problem, though, is that gave everyone the impression that that he was considered, or that he maybe perhaps considered himself to be superhumanly wise, and therefore was implicitly becoming a rival to the authoritarian figures, at least in the government and perhaps even religiously. And so therein lies the threat to the political structure to Athens. As he elaborates his defense, he starts off by saying that he's going to talk about two things. The first thing he's going to talk about is all of the information that's been communicated about him, and it's inaccurate. So what he's trying to do essentially is address the bias, the misgivings that people have about him based off, things like the play and what hearsay and what he categorizes as slander, as characterizations of his actual nature, actual persona, his own character. And then the second half of his defense is that he's going to address the specific charges brought to him more recently by Meletus.
That's correct.
And as you read this, I think Socrates expresses very well the pain that's involved with doing that, because he points out through several times in his dialogue how hard it is to erase slander. I mean, he basically has one day to make a defense of himself. And in this one day, he has to erase the slander that has accumulated on his character for years and years and years and years. And so it's a huge challenge for him. And I think he rightly says, you're going to have to give me the benefit of the doubt and understand that the information that you know about me is very likely flawed and based off of hearsay and based off of partial or complete untruths.
Correct.
Yeah.
So the reason why he starts with that one first is because that is the thing that societal bias is what is extremely important for one to understand. For a juror to be completely impartial, they have to take away this storyline from their mind about Socrates and then judge whether this person is in fact just or not. And so he says this, he uses like, one must literally fight with shadows to defend oneself and cross-examine with no one to respond. He's talking about this societal bias, this storyline. He's defending against shadows. He doesn't know what to do in that situation because there's no one up in front of him who's accusing him of that. They're accusing him of this impiety and other business, but no one is actually putting the charge. The charge that Socrates commits injustice and is a busybody, in that he investigates the things beneath the earth and in the heavens, makes the weaker argument the stronger, and teaches these things to others. That charge is what was laid to him by the societal bias, and he has no way to defend against that. So he's trying his best to kind of come out of that situation. And so what he says is that, if you think that I am spending this time going about and educating others about this way that I feel about life, about what the greater and the smaller are, and sophistry, and I'm teaching that to the young ones, show me proof of that. Show me the proof that I'm actually doing this. Because if I were to ask someone, in any prominent person in Athens today, I'm saying, hey, listen, you have sons, you have children, you want to get them educated. What is your plan? How are you planning to get these people educated? And you're like, well, we know this very famous sophist that he lives in this other town, and I'm going to pay this person large sums of money to come teach my kids. And Socrates' answer to that is, that's great. So that means there is somebody out there who is so learned, who's so wise that you're ready to entrust your children's future to this person. I have to meet this person and have a conversation with this person and figure out, what can I learn from this person? The reason why he wants to do that is because he was told that he is actually the wisest man. And so he wants to go out and prove that that's not the case. And so he wants to meet all these wise people, quote unquote wise people, that are being employed, who are charging huge sums of money to impart this wisdom. The same charge that is being laid against Socrates, these people are doing out in the open, and they're charging money for it. And Socrates never took a pie from anybody. And so then what is the charge against Socrates? Because Socrates asked this question. People ask me, what is my profession? What is my profession? Because these people, these fine sophists, have a profession. And so as long as you charge money for it and go about saying that you're wise and impart wisdom, you're fine. But if you're not going to charge anything for it, and you're going to sit there and you're going to say that you're wise and you're going to impart that to someone, that is against the law, or that is not something that's palatable. And that is another way that the society, the way it looks at Socrates, or the work that he's doing, they cannot fathom the fact that he's doing it just because of a calling, and for no other purpose.
Right. Yeah. So basically, the first part of his defense predominates around him addressing this pre-existing bias against the misconceptions about the nature of his character and him as a person, and his quest for understanding, essentially his pursuit of wisdom. The second part of his defense focuses on what he calls the more recent allegations, which are the specific charges that Miletus brings against him. And you're right. What he says is there's a little bit of a backstory here, which is that a friend of his goes to the oracle of Delphi. Mm-hmm. So the oracle is where, the Greeks would go to consult with the gods. And, unfortunate as it is, Socrates' friend asked the oracle, is there anybody in Athens wiser than Socrates? And the oracle replies, no. So this guy goes and tells Socrates, "Hey,
you're
the
the
gods
wisest."
think you're the wisest person in Athens." And Socrates is flabbergasted. He's thinking, "How can this possibly be true?"
Doesn't Socrates also make a trip and ask the same question? He gets the same answer.
Yeah, I believe so. And so then, so what he does is he begins then at that point to systematically test this hypothesis, essentially that he is the wisest person in Athens. So he consults with politicians, he consults with poets, which back then at that time, poetry had more to do with sort of elaborations of concepts and religious expressions. He speaks to the craftsmen, he speaks to the mathematicians. And what he finds is that he indeed realizes that he is wiser because the simple fact is that Socrates is aware of what he does not know.
That's a very important point.
He's aware of the limits of his knowledge. But when he talks to these authoritative figures in all of their specific fields, none of them will acquiesce and admit that they can't explain why they know what they know about their particular field. When he talks to the mathematicians, they can't explain the foundational principle that leads them to the expressions that they generate on paper to explain the mathematical relationships around them. He can't find the information from the craftsmen about what guides, what they do. So even though they're experts at the field, what he says is that they don't know a lot of why they do what they do. And despite the fact that they're experts in their field, the fact that they don't know why they do what they do, i.e. this unexamined profession, this unexamined life, this unexamined arrangement, completely negates any practical or small practical wisdom they have within their small field, and therefore that makes them unwise because they're unwilling to admit, or they fail to realize that there's a lot of what they do that is purely by convention. They don't really know why they do what they do, and through that simple fact, Socrates rationalizes in that way I am more wise because I'm at least aware of the fact that there's a limit, that I don't know why these things happen. And
right.
So, or that people do these things. And Socrates does a very elegant maneuver here to say he uses this as his defense against being somebody who's godless. Because what he says is, well, what I'm doing every time I test somebody is I'm reaffirming what the gods have said, or I'm reaffirming what the Oracle of Delphi, who's the spokesperson for Apollo, says. So every time, even though I'm frustrating people, even though I'm irritating some people about the fact that they really can't explain what's at the root, at the foundation of their craft or at their expertise, every time I do that, I'm actually acting in accordance with what the gods have said, and I'm proving what the gods have said is true. So he uses that in a way to defend himself to this. That's one way he defends himself against the godless claim, which is pretty.
So let's think about this, right? So we are back in Athens, right? Eddie, you're a famous surgeon in Athens, and you're just minding your own business. You're going out through, walking through the marketplace, and suddenly you get accosted by this grubby, dirty looking man, and he's surrounded by a bunch of very prominent young people. And he stands there and says, Dr. Leclerc, tell me, what do you know about justice?
Right.
And before that, he says, you're considered to be the prominent surgeon here in Athens. You must be a very wise person. And you would go, yes, I'm actually very wise. So that's great because Socrates know nothing. And so I'm here to learn from you. Mm-hmm. Please tell me, can you tell me, what is justice? And then he ensnares you in this conversation. And at the end of it, he draws out the fact that he won't tell you what justice is, but you cannot tell him what justice is either. And at the end of it, he would be that, well, if you were so wise, how is it that you don't know what justice is? And if you don't know what justice is, don't you think that's important to know? You're a surgeon. You deal with life and death on a daily basis. Is it important for someone like you to know what justice is? And he would encounter Dr. Pakala, and he'd be like, hey, Dr. Pakala, you're a cardiologist, very prominent cardiologist. Are you wise? Oh yeah, I'm wise. I'm a cardiologist. Yeah. Crying out loud. And then he would do the same thing to me. And then you and me would meet later on and say, man, we met that guy. He accosted me in the market again and made me a fool in front of everybody. Asked me silly questions like, what is justice and what is wisdom?
Yeah.
What does that guy know? I went to medical school, man. Like, if I can be a cardiologist, I obviously know about justice. I obviously know about these things. I'm an intelligent guy. I'm wise. And that was the problem that Socrates was creating. He was going about and meeting very prominent people. And he says, what he found was where wisdom is concerned, those who had the best reputations were practically the most deficient.
Yeah.
So he went to the highest of highest offices and accosted them. And he went to the artisans and the lowest to lowest, the blue collar workers and everybody. And whoever he met, that person he found him deficient in wisdom. So then you have to ask yourself, what kind of a guy goes about accosting people and making them look like they're dumb, right? What is the purpose of that kind of a life?
What's funny though is that it's not so much that he's doing that deliberately though. What he's doing is essentially asking people to elaborate the rationale, and he just keeps going back. So I think if there was like a Socrates MD, for example, he would be very good at filtering out. I mean, think about how many things we do in medicine purely because of convention. We don't have any data to back it up. I imagine that like a Socrates MD would be very quick to point out, why are we doing this? And what is the evidence to support this? And why do you do that? And he would eventually get you to the point where you have to admit, I don't know. That's just how I was trained. Right. And then that is the moment where he would say, well, then clearly, but there's a great line at the end of the 22D on the translation we're reading, which made me think of, the life of the physician. So he's talking about when he talked to the craftsmen, and I'm reading, because he performed his own craft well, each of them also thought himself to be the wisest about other things, the most important ones. And this error of theirs seemed to overshadow their wisdom.
That's right. So that's the point. So obviously I know what I'm talking about. I'm a cardiologist, man. I went to medical school.
Right.
And that's the problem.
Of course I'm smart. Of course I'm wise.
We discussed this in wisdom, right? We said, does a man have to be educated to be wise? Right. The answer is no. Practical wisdom, that's something else altogether. But here's the catch. The catch is, so what they're telling Socrates, what this storyline that was created about Socrates by generations above was that he was a busybody, that he would go around accosting people and making them look like fools. And he thought himself wise, right? And this was a big charge against him. Prominent people like Eddie and Aneesh were going around saying that Socrates is a busybody. We need to get rid of this guy. Look, because he was making them look like fools for no other reason. Because Socrates says this, and Plato says this too, one can be wise. People have no problem with that. But once you start really going out there and imparting that wisdom to other people, that's when people start having a problem with it. So if you and me read philosophy and sit down and just, do it amongst ourselves, no one will care. But once you start really getting our views out there and kind of accosting people and saying, hey, listen, what about justice, my friend? Then they start creating a problem. Then they're like, this person is a gadfly. We need to get this person out. You see what I mean?
It's you create cognitive dissonance.
You create a problem.
Identify things that people haven't really considered at depth.
People don't want to be disturbed. They don't want to be told that they are not thinking about other things. They are too busy in their own lives. And they don't want to be shaken up and said, hey, listen, what about justice? What about wisdom? What about, they don't care about these things. They don't want to care about these. It's not that they don't care. I'm sorry, I would take that back. They don't want to be made aware. And once there's someone out there making them aware, that becomes a problem. Instead of dealing with the problem of unawareness, they want to get rid of the person who's the instigator. And that's what's happening with Socrates.
Yeah. I mean, again, to shine the personal light, when I read the Apology, I see myself as sort of one of the uninitiated, uninterested, conventional individuals who would have reacted to Socrates by telling him to jump off a cliff, leave me alone while you're doing this. And I think for a lot of, at least people in the healthcare field and healthcare work, it really takes, and we've talked about this, it takes a moment of reckoning. You almost need to be sort of prepared. You need to be put in a position to where now you're ready, you're interested in looking for bigger answers and understand the factors, the foundations, all of the contributing ingredients to whatever struggle or suffering that you're finding yourself in. And it's in that moment when you read the Apology and the Platonic dialogues that a lot of it makes sense. So there has to be sort of a motivating effect. Life has to bring you to this point. Because if not, it's very easy to react, unless you're just a very curious person. If you happen to be like Socrates, somebody who's completely fixated and placed the orbit of their life around this idea of understanding the truth to the extent that you can, you're going to be very resistant to the introspection that's triggered by some of these dialogues.
That's correct. But, there's something to be said about that, because what he's doing is he's already going to people who are already established in society. And so society has a role there too, right? It elevates people to this position without asking them or without asking of them, these questions.
Blind leading blind, yeah.
Right, that's right. And so that is involuntary action. Even those folks who find themselves in these prominent positions have not gotten there because of any personal worth. It's because of things like fame, things like fortune, which are not in their control, as opposed to virtue, which is completely in their control. And that's what he's trying to bring out. Right. Coming back to the point of Socrates being in fact a busybody, if someone goes around doing this to everybody, keeps knocking on their doors and proving that the person inside the house is unwise, that person is in fact a thorn on the side of regular everyday people. So that could be still considered to be an accusation someone could very squarely bring onto someone, saying, man, listen, I live my life, I don't bother you, why are you bothering me? So the way Socrates comes to that, how he defends that, is kind of something of what you said, right? He says, you cannot accuse me of that because the gods told me that I'm the wisest. Now it's my responsibility to kind of uphold that fact. But actually, if you read into it a little bit, what the gods told him was, yes, Socrates, you are the wisest. But what does that mean? Socrates says, what does that mean when the gods say that I'm the wisest? I cannot be wisest in, when it comes to the gods, I cannot be as wise. I'm just wise when it comes to maybe human things. But even that I'm not the wisest about, because I know there are people out there who are probably wiser than I am. So what makes Socrates wise? So he says, then I finally came to the understanding of what makes me wise is that I don't know, and I know that I don't know. Exactly. The knowledge of not knowing, that fact that I do not know, that is wisdom.
And herein lies the idea that is the beginning of wisdom.
That is the beginning of wisdom.
Understand.
And the reason why he's the wisest is because he's not found anybody who doesn't know, and he knows that he doesn't know. He keeps running into people who say that who don't know, and they think that they know. And that is the worst form in his mind. He's doing God's work by going up to them and making them realize, making Eddie and Aneesh realize that, one, they don't know, and they thought that they knew. And now, because they've spoken to Socrates, they know that they don't know. And that is the God's work. And that's why he takes no money for it. He's ready to be absolutely impecunious. Like he has nothing to show for it. He has dirty clothes and barely has a morsel to eat. But he's going about doing God's work. Yeah.
I mean, he if anything, he just loved talking to people. He was just a consummate conversationalist.
Doing God's work.
But there was a little bit of a selfish motivation there and we're jumping ahead, but he thought that conversations about virtue, about what the good life is, that is the highest form of human action that there is. I mean, that is precisely what we should spend most of our time doing. And what he found was that people who don't do that were really living what he called unexamined lives.
He makes that.
And so this is what he means by the unexamined life, meaning going back and, trying to understand the rational scaffolding that lives beneath your assumptions in life. Because if you don't do that, then you're susceptible to dogma, you're susceptible to demagogues, you're susceptible to all of the hazards that social life presents to humans who are trying to work with one another.
Yeah. So I think this is actually a good point to stop, because this is the first half of the argument. This is the societal bias, the societal norms that he talks about. And I think so. Just to recap, his defense starts with the bias that society has created and the storyline that they have made about Socrates. There's a Socrates the person, and Socrates a persona, which the poets have created through silly poems or in plays like The Cloud, where he's made to sound like this silly person, who's going about just annoying and irritating people. And there's another persona which is even more dark and dangerous, which is very prominent people have been made to realize that they probably are not deserving of their positions of power. And then not so prominent people like even artisans and just white and blue collar workers who realize that they have not spent their time trying to figure out the bigger aspects of life, like the human ethics, and all they're focused on is their one craft, and that makes them doesn't make them complete, human beings. And that is a more dangerous kind of a problem there, which for Socrates, because now the whole society is turned against him.
Right.
So that's one part. And then now the second part is going to be the actual charges that have been laid. We can discuss that in the next.
Yeah, we can do that next one. And so in the next section, we'll talk about how he addresses the specific charges, and he kicks things off by addressing the charge that he's corrupting the youth, and so that leads him into discussions about, well, what is it that what actually adds to the growth and development of the youth in a healthy and good way.
Yeah.
And so he basically tears down Miletus's argument.
Oh yeah.
Little by little, in a very, I think, elegant way, but it's rife with Socratic irony. I mean, he's a master at it. So
and yes, and anybody with children, need to pay attention to that part of the dialogue. He talks about what's important when it comes to education.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, I guess we'll leave it there.
All right.
All right.